Jivanmukti Viveka. Jivanmukti Viveka. There is a text called the Jivanmukti Viveka, meaning something like the discrimination of living liberation, attributed to the 14th century scholar Vidyaranya, who worked within the Vijayanagara court and wrote also the celebrated Pankadashi. The period was one of great political turbulence on the Indian subcontinent, and yet Vidyaranya wrote not as a man in retreat, but as a man with something urgent to say. His purpose in this text is practical and precise, to demonstrate that liberation, what the tradition calls moksha, does not require physical death, that the recognition of one's true nature as pure, unbounded awareness can occur while the body still breathes and the ordinary life continues. This is the doctrine of Jivanmukti, liberation while living, and Vidyaranya maps its territory with the care of a physician mapping a recovery. A word about how this text works and how this reading works. The Jivanmukti Viveka is not a continuous philosophical essay. It is a Sanskrit text that builds its argument primarily through quotation. Vidyaranya marshals a vast array of verses from the Yoga Vasishta, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and other canonical sources, and weaves his own prose commentary around them. The text moves by accumulation of authority. Every major claim is supported by a cited verse, and understanding Vidyaranya means hearing those verses, not just the argument they are made to support. This reading will therefore include key canonical verses in English rendering at the places where Vidyaranya himself introduces them, so that you hear not only the logic, but the living language the text actually uses to make its case. Where a verse derives from an earlier source that Vidyaranya is quoting, the Yoga Vasishta, Gaudapada, or the Upanishads, that source is identified, because part of what makes this text extraordinary is its intertextual architecture. Vidyaranya is conducting a conversation across centuries, and you deserve to hear who is speaking. The narration that follows moves through 12 phases. These are a structural frame for listening, not a division that appears in the Sanskrit. Within that frame, the teaching is Vidyaranya's, and the verses are the canonical foundation on which he builds it. Here now is the Jivanmukti Viveka. Phase 1. The mandate of the living free. The first question the text must answer is the question of possibility. Is liberation while living even a coherent idea? The tradition has sometimes spoken as though moksha belongs only to the moment after death, when the individual soul is finally released from its physical shell. Vidyaranya begins by refusing this limitation directly, and he does so not with his own authority alone, but by assembling the testimony of the scriptures themselves. The Jivanmukti Viveka opens by establishing what a Jivanmukta is. It is the state of one who, while still possessing a body and moving through the ordinary world, has ceased to be bound by the world's claim on the heart. Bondage is not a physical rope. It is a mental scent, a vasana, that makes the world appear real and valuable in a way that compels grasping. Freedom is not the disappearance of the world. It is the disappearance of the compulsive claim the world makes on the heart. The sage sees the shape that once looked like a snake, but knowing it to be a rope, no longer shakes with fear. The vision persists, but the poison of the belief in the snake is gone. Vidyaranya turns immediately to the Yoga Vasishta to establish the canonical ground for this claim. This text, the great encyclopedic scripture of Advaita, is the evidentiary backbone of the entire Jivanmukti Viveka, and Vidyaranya returns to it again and again. From its Nirvana Prakarana, he quotes, "He who has realized the self in the self, whose bondage from action is destroyed, whose mind is cool, who finds equal pleasure in happiness and in misery, he is called a Jivanmukta." And again, from the same scripture, "He who has no craving in his heart for the enjoyments of this world or of the next, who has obtained a lull in consciousness, and who remains without any distinction, he is a Jivanmukta." These two verses do the foundational work. Liberation while living is not a marginal idea invented by one school. It is a recognized state, named and described in the Yoga Vasishta, with identifiable marks: the absence of craving, the cooling of the mind, the equanimity between pleasure and pain, and the recognition of the self in the self. If liberation only happened after death, no one could ever testify to its truth. We would be following the map of a man who never arrived. The Jivanmukta is the living proof of the teaching. If you cannot be free now, you will never be free. Time and death are concepts within the dream. To wait for death to be free is like a person in a nightmare waiting for a dream doctor to perform a dream surgery. True sovereignty is the act of waking up, and waking happens right where you are standing. Vidyaranya classifies two grades of the free. The Jivanmukta, the living free, continues in the body because of its past momentum, but the sense of being the doer is incinerated. The Vidhamukta, the disembodied free, is the state after the momentum reaches zero, the body falls, and the light returns to its source without leaving a trace. The only difference between them is the persistence of the body. The Jivanmukta is the sun reflecting in a clear lake. The Vidhamukta is the sun after the lake has evaporated. The light is identical in both. The mandate of the living free is established. Liberation is a change in identity, not a change in biology. The world is a harmless optical echo for the sage. The goal is available in the present moment. Phase 2, the triple thread. The student of this text is not satisfied with knowing that liberation while living is possible. He wants to know why it is so difficult to stabilize. He has understood the logic. He knows the self is the absolute, yet the mind remains a storm, anger rises, fear returns, and the realization flickers. Vidyaranya's answer is that the aspirant is suffering from an incomplete convalescence. He has identified the disease, but has not yet removed the inflammation. To become unshakable, Vidyaranya teaches, 3 practices must turn together. First, Tattvajnana, the knowledge of truth, the unshakable realization that the self is the only reality. Second, Mananasha, the dissolution of the mind, the reduction of the mind's tendency to create separation. Third, Vasana Kshaya, the destruction of traces, the incineration of the latent habitual impressions of desire and aversion. Knowledge without the death of the mind is theoretical. The death of the mind without knowledge is stupor. The destruction of traces without both is temporary. Only when all 3 are practiced together does the Jivanmukta become unshakable. They support each other reciprocally. When knowledge rises, the apparent reality of the mind's world begins to die. When the mind is stilled, the latent traces have no field in which to play. When the traces are destroyed, the mind has no fuel to generate ripples, and knowledge becomes stable. Imagine a poisonous tree. Knowledge of truth is cutting the root. Dissolution of the mind is cutting the branches. Destruction of traces is drying up the sap. If you cut the root, but the sap is still flowing, new branches will sprout from the stump. You must attack the tree from every direction at once. Vidyaranya draws support for this triple structure from the Yoga Vasishta, which describes the mutual dependence of these three, with a verse that runs through the entire Jivanmukti Viveka like a refrain. Destruction of the vasanas, knowledge of the self, and cessation of the mind modifications, these three, when practiced together and simultaneously, constitute liberation. One of these three practiced to a high degree brings about the other two. This reciprocal relationship is important. Vidyaranya is not prescribing a sequential three-step program. He is describing a system of mutual reinforcement in which progress on any front loosens the ground beneath the others. The seeker may begin wherever his temperament allows. The result, when all three have done their work, is Jivanmukti. Vidyaranya also distinguishes two kinds of seekers in relation to this triple practice. The mumukshu, the seeker who still aspires to liberation, practices the three in order to reach the truth. The jnani sannyasi, the knower who has renounced, already possesses the truth, but continues to practice the three in order to stabilize it as Jivanmukti. Knowledge gives you the right to the kingdom. The dissolution of mind and traces gives you the enjoyment of the kingdom. Do not be a king who lives in his own palace as if he were still a prisoner. The triple thread is drawn tight. Phase 3. The anatomy of the trace. What is a vasana? Vidyaranya defines it with the precision of a biologist. It is a potent impression produced in the mind by long-continued habit, causing a thought to arise suddenly, without reflection, and without considering the before or the after. Imagine a jar that once held musk. The musk is gone. The jar is empty, yet the scent remains clinging to the clay. The vasana is that scent. It is the biological momentum of the ego. It is the reason why, even after you know you are the absolute, you still reach for comfort or snap in anger. It is the unconscious command that bypasses your logic. Vidyaranya identifies three massive classes of trace that keep the soul in a state of forgetfulness. The first is the world obsession, loka vasana, the addiction to social approval, the need to be praised, the fear of being ridiculed, the treatment of other people's opinions as the final judges of reality. The second is the scriptural obsession, shastra vasana, the addiction to scholarship, the endless love of argument, the desire to know the grammar of every text. The person who studies endlessly has traded the experience of the sun for the study of the map. Even the Vedas can become a chain if you use them to decorate the ego rather than to dissolve it. The third is the body obsession, dehavasana, the identification with the physical form. It takes three shapes: the desire to be attractive, the obsession with ritual cleanliness or perfect health, and the constant anxiety of keeping the machine running. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes a verse that names all three categories at once and establishes what their destruction amounts to. Freedom from the ideas of desirability and undesirability in respect of the things of this world, absence of curiosity in regard to the acquisition of scriptural knowledge, and absence of care for the body. These three, when they combine in a person, are the indicators of one whose vasanas are destroyed. Not all traces are pathogens. The pure trace, the Shuddha vasana, is that which knows the self to be distinct from the body and leads toward knowledge rather than toward attachment. The desire for truth, the practice of kindness, and the hunger for freedom are pure vasanas. They are the good bacteria of the mind. We do not destroy these in the beginning. We use them to crowd out the impure. They are the ladder we use to climb out of the pit. Only at the very end, once the seeker stands on the roof, is even the pure trace allowed to evaporate. Why is the impure trace so strong? Because of repetition. Every time you obey an impulse, every time you seek praise or pamper the body, you are watering the root. The vasana grows thick like a cable. The Jivanmukta is the one who has stopped the watering. He lets the old cables dry out and snap through the logic of indifference. The anatomy of the trace is complete. Bondage is a scent left by habit. The obsessions, social, academic, and biological, are the primary pathogens. The pure tendencies are the instruments of the cure. When an old habit rises, do not call it yourself. Call it the scent of the past. Phase 4. The surgery of habits. A habit is not an eternal law. It is a groove carved by repetition. What has been built by doing can be dismantled by undoing. Vasanakshaya is the surgical drying up of the mental sap. You do not fight the habit with anger, because anger is just more fuel. You destroy the habit by starvation. You must withdraw the value you have projected onto the objects of your desire until the ego machine grinds to a halt for lack of interest. The first phase of surgery is substitution. You cannot leave the mind a vacuum. If you simply stop an impure habit, the void will soon be filled by something worse. You must replace the pathogen with the antidote. The impure trace says, I want praise from the crowd. The pure substitute says, I want only the truth of the self. The mind is still wanting, but it is now wanting the very thing that will eventually dissolve the wanter. Use one thorn to pull out the thorn stuck in your skin. Once the first thorn is out, you do not keep the second one. You throw both away. Cultivate the pure habit of inquiry until the impure habit of the world withers. Vidyaranya quotes the Yoga Vasishta on the clinical moment, when an old impulse rises violently. When the mind runs toward sense objects, the wise man should turn it away by the force of Viveka, discrimination. When the mind has run out, like a lamp without oil, then the mind is said to be destroyed. This is the practical instruction. When a craving surges, you do not suppress it with brute force, which only redirects its energy. You meet it with discrimination, with the clear seeing that this object, this praise, this comfort, does not contain the reality the habit mind imagines it contains. Treated with this cool seeing, the impulse has nothing to feed on. It rises and subsides without leaving a new groove. Just as a person who wants to cross a river must keep rowing against the current, the seeker must maintain the unbroken thought of oneness to counter the current of the past. A habit that took a long time to build cannot be killed by a single weekend of logic. You need momentum to fight momentum. Every time you choose to identify as the witness rather than the sufferer, you are performing a microsurgery. You are widening the pure groove and narrowing the impure one. Vidyaranya is careful at this point to note that the destruction of the vasanas does not mean the eradication of all spontaneous activity. The sage continues to act. What is destroyed is the compulsive, craving-driven character of that activity. The sage acts as a physician acts, intelligently, appropriately, without the distortion of personal longing. The world continues to be navigated. The navigator is no longer driven by need. Stop judging yourself for your recurring habits. Judgment is just the ego wearing a holy mask. Instead, be the clinical observer. Watch the old gears turn. See them as mechanical data from a dead past. Remain as the equal flavor of awareness. The starvation has begun. Phase 5. The death of the shadow mind. Even after the habits begin to thin, the mind itself remains. Even without a specific desire, it continues to ripple, to count, to judge, and to plan. It is a restless movement that haunts the field of awareness. Mananasha is the clinical termination of the mind's tendency to take shapes. It is the act of turning the reflecting surface back into the light it reflects. Vidyaranya draws on the Yoga Vasishta's account of the mind's nature to establish what dissolution actually means. The mind is not a solid entity. It is a series of modifications, like waves on a lake. If the waves are constant, you think the wave is a thing. If the waves stop, you find only the water. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes, "The mind is nothing but a heap of vasanas. When the vasanas are destroyed, the mind is also destroyed. When the mind is destroyed, the I notion also becomes destroyed." This verse makes the causal chain explicit. The vasanas produce the mind's rippling. The mind's rippling produces the sense of a separate I work backward along the chain, and the I dissolves into its source. Vasanakashaya and Mananasha are therefore not separate projects, but a single project approached from two ends. There are two paths to the dissolution of the mind. The forceful path attempts the suppression of the breath and the senses. This is like trying to stop a river by building a dam. If the dam breaks, the mind returns with a flood of redirected energy. The subtle path achieves the dissolution of the mind through the realization of its non-existence. This is like realizing the snake is a rope. Once the error is seen, the snake does not need to be killed. It simply vanishes. How does one unthink? The mind must be kept in a state of vigorous stillness where it is neither sleeping nor thinking. Observe the gap between two thoughts. In that gap, the mind is absent, yet awareness is present. Stay in the now before the next label is born. The mind is like a flame in a jar. If you remove the air, the attention to objects, the flame goes out. The jar awareness remains, but it is no longer lit by the flickering mind. It is lit by its own unconditioned radiance. Mananasha is not the destruction of the capacity to know. It is the destruction of the tendency to ripple. Consider a polished jewel. When the mind is active, it is like a jewel covered in dust. When the mind is dissolved, the awareness does not lose its brilliance. It finally manifests its brilliance because the dust is gone. The sage is more alert than the dreamer, for he is no longer distracted by his own shadows. The machine is silent. Phase 6. The Yoga of No Touch. Knowledge gives you the kingdom, but stabilization gives you the peace to inhabit it. The practice Vidyaranya turns to here is concentration, samadhi, as the clinical stabilizer of the vision that has already been established through inquiry. He introduces a phrase that belongs to an earlier master, Asparsha Yoga, the yoga of no touch. Here a note of attribution is necessary. The phrase and its formulation, the yoga that has no touch with anything, which is difficult for even the yogis to see, for they are afraid of it, seeing fear where there is none, comes not from the Jivanmukti Viveka itself, but from the Mandukya Karika of Gaudapada, the great 7th century Advaita teacher and an important source for Shankara. The verse in Gaudapada's text reads, "This yoga of no touch is difficult to be seen by all the yogis, for the yogis are afraid of it, seeing fear where there is no fear." Vidyaranya quotes this teaching approvingly and uses it to describe the character of the deepest samadhi. He is not claiming the verse as his own. He is, characteristically, marshalling a great predecessor as a witness. The yoga of no touch is the state where the world may still appear, but no longer has the hands to touch your heart. Vidyaranya also classifies 2 depths of concentration that bear on the Jivanmukta's practice. The first, Samprajñāta Samadhi, is a state of highly clarified, object-supported absorption, the mind held steady in a single luminous recognition. The second, Asamprajñāta Samadhi, is the absorption in which even the supporting object dissolves and only the bare awareness remains, without a knower or a known. Vidyaranya is careful, more careful than a simple 2-step model suggests, about how these states relate to Jivanmukti. Asamprajñāta Samadhi is the culmination of the practice of mananasha. It is the experiential correlate of what the knowledge of non-duality points to. But Vidyaranya does not teach that Jivanmukti simply requires reaching this state repeatedly. The relationship is more delicate. Stable Jivanmukti requires that the insight established in deep samadhi not evaporate when the sage moves in the world. This is precisely the problem of stabilization. The seeker may touch a samprajñāta and return still subject to the pull of old vasanas. Until the vasanas are sufficiently destroyed, even genuine samadhi will not produce unshakable liberation. The 3 threads, knowledge, dissolution of mind, destruction of traces, must do their work together. Samadhi is a powerful instrument in that work, but it is one instrument among 3, not the single solution. Why is a sparsha called no touch? Because usually the mind is a sticky substance. It touches an object and becomes attached. It touches a memory and becomes sad. In the deepest practice, the mind becomes like mercury or space. It allows the world to pass through it, reflects the world's colors, but never joins with them. Sovereignty is the realization that you are the unscratchable substance. How is the silence of samadhi different from deep sleep? In deep sleep, the mind is folded back into darkness. You wake and say, "I knew nothing." In samadhi, the mind is folded back into the luminous source of awareness itself. You emerge and say, "I was the all." In sleep, the lamp is covered by a black cloth. In samadhi, the lamp is uncovered, but there are no objects in the room to catch the light. The sage is more awake than the waker, for he is witnessing the raw energy of existence without the filter of names. The vision is steady. Phase 7. The signs of the unbound. How does the unbound one walk? How does he speak? What are the signs that the ego has been successfully dissolved and will not return? The primary sign of the unbound is the total absence of the sting in the presence of the world's dualities. To map this recovery, Vidyaranya draws on the Yoga Vasishta's account of the 7 bhumikas, the 7 stages or grounds of wisdom. He quotes the Yoga Vasishta directly and at length, because the 7 stages are not his own taxonomy. They are the canonical framework he is importing to describe the grades of the sovereign's evolution. The first bhumi is Shubheka, the longing for the good. The first spark, the realization that the world of objects does not contain the satisfaction it promises, and the arising of the desire for true understanding. The second is Vicarana, inquiry, the active study of the teachings, the surgical pursuit of the question, who am I, association with teachers and with the wise. The third is Tanumanasa, the thinning of the mind. As inquiry deepens, cravings grow weak, the world of multiplicity begins to look transparent, and the mind's density decreases. The fourth is Sattvapati, the attainment of sattva or pure being. The truth strikes with the force of direct recognition. The world looks like a dream, and this is the threshold of Jivanmukti. Vidyaranya is clear, following the Yoga Vasishta, that the first genuine Jivanmukta appears at this fourth stage. The fifth is a Samshakti, non-attachment. The sage rests in the self so deeply that the dream objects no longer have the power to distract. The sixth is Padarthabhavana, the non-perception of objects as hard realities. The solidity of things is dissolved, and the sage, absorbed in the ocean of awareness, no longer notices the waves. He must sometimes be brought back to the surface to eat or speak. The seventh is Turiyaga, the condition of the fourth, the absolute peak, where the boundary between I and the infinite is vaporized entirely, and the sage abides as the sky itself. Vidyaranya draws a careful distinction across these stages. He notes that the Yoga Vasishta describes the fourth through seventh bhumikas as the stages of the Jivanmukta, but not identically. The sage of the fourth stage still has functioning ordinary consciousness alongside the recognition of the self. The sage of the sixth and seventh stages has crossed into what the Yoga Vasishta calls the Vidha condition even while alive, a kind of living disembodiment in which the ordinary world has nearly ceased to appear. These are not the same type of Jivanmukta, and the Jivanmukti Viveka is honest about the gradations. A crucial distinction is made here between the seeker and the sage in relation to virtue. The seeker practices kindness, humility, and patience with effort. These are his tools for scrubbing the mirror. The sage manifests kindness, humility, and patience without effort. These are his ornaments. Virtues like the absence of hate and compassion are not disciplines for the sage. They are reflexes of reality. If you realize that every other is your own self, you cannot be cruel, just as you cannot bite your own tongue in anger. Sovereignty is the state where the moral law becomes a biological fact. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes a verse on the quality of the sage's vision. The Jivanmukta lives and moves among all creatures with an equal eye, free from elation or depression, as the moon lives in the sky among clouds, sometimes visible, sometimes not, but always the same. The signs are not primarily in the outward behavior, but in the absence of agitation at the root. The sage possesses what might be called double vision. The biological gaze sees the colors and shapes required for survival. The sovereign gaze sees the unbroken canvas upon which the colors are painted. He is like a person watching a magic show. The ignorant person is terrified of the tiger on stage. The sage enjoys the tiger's roar, but his heart remains cool, for his eye is fixed on the truth behind the illusion. The patient is free. Phase 8. The momentum of the arrow. If the cause of the body, ignorance, is dead, why is the effect, the body, still standing? Why does the sage still feel the bite of hunger or the heat of a fever? Vidyaranya's answer is the doctrine of prarabdha karma, the momentum of already initiated action. Knowledge kills the power of the mind to create new bondage, but the current body is like an arrow already in flight. Once the archer has released the string, the arrow must finish its arc. Even if the archer realizes the target was a mirage, he cannot call the arrow back. The sage is the archer who has put down his bow, watching his final arrow finish its flight. Consider the potter's wheel. The potter uses a stick to spin the wheel. The stick is the ego's will. When knowledge rises, the potter removes the stick. Does the wheel stop instantly? No, it continues to spin because of the momentum generated while the stick was present. The life of the sage is a continuation of that spin. The ignorance that initiated the current life has been cut, but the body and mind continue to move. To the world, the wheel looks active. To the wheel, the movement is a mechanical echo of a dead force. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes on this point. The body of the Jivanmukta, though visible, is like the body seen in a dream. It exists, it moves, but it has no essential reality for the one who sees truly. As the dreamer in a dream experiences joy and sorrow, so the Jivanmukta appears to experience them, but without their sting. We must distinguish between sensation and suffering. Sensation is a biological signal in the nervous system. Suffering is the psychological claim, this is happening to me, and it matters in the deepest way. The sage still feels the heat, but he no longer runs toward the mirage with a cup. The pain is a sublated appearance. It vibrates in the mind mirror, but the witness remains undisturbed. The sage's body is a character in the story of its own karma. He watches the character get wounded, but he knows his own nature is never touched. The sage bears the results of past actions as a mountain bears the wind. He treats his own biography as technical data. If the body gets sick, the biological machine is malfunctioning and he acts to address it. If the world offers praise, he hears it as background noise. He has withdrawn the owner from the house, and so the furniture of his life can be moved or broken without disturbing his peace. He is the stationary sky through which the storm of prarabdha passes. Stop trying to cure your destiny. The body will finish its arc in its own time. Instead, withdraw the ownership. The momentum is weightless. Phase 9. The sovereignty of renunciation. If the sage has already found the truth, why does he still speak of renunciation? If he is already the all, what is left for him to give up? Vidyaranya's answer is that you must distinguish between the means and the end. The renunciation of the seeker is a social and physical act. He leaves his household, takes a vow, and devotes his life to study and practice. It is a tool used to cure the fever of desire. The renunciation of the knower is an internal and cognitive act. The sage renounces the world not because he hates it, but because he has seen through its apparent solidity. The first is the act of a person leaving a burning building. The second is the act of a person realizing the fire was a painting. The social monk carries a staff of wood to signal his vow to the world. The sovereign carries the staff of knowledge as a sign of his inner reality. Social monkhood is a form. Internal sovereignty is a status of awareness. The true renunciation of the knower is the destruction of the conviction that the world has independent reality. The sage may live in a cave or he may live in a palace, but because he has realized the dreamlike nature of the world, he has technically left the world even while standing in the middle of it. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes a verse on this inner renunciation. He who has given up the three cities, the waking, dream, and deep sleep states, and who rests in the fourth, the Turiya, he is truly the renunciate, not one who wears the ochre robe. Why does the knower renounce? He renounces the value of the finite to rest in the bliss of the infinite. Usually we cling to things because we believe they possess a heart of reality. We think the gold is real. We think the praise is real. The knower renunciate withdraws his belief in the independent reality of all objects. The mirror is seen as glass. The reflection is seen as light. Renunciation is the natural byproduct of non-duality. Does the sage become a hermit? Does he stop talking to people? True solitude is not the absence of people. It is the absence of the belief in people as separate, dense, ultimately real entities. The sage is in the crowd, yet he is in absolute solitude, for his attention is anchored in the canvas rather than in the characters painted on it. Renunciation is the act of no longer being driven by the claim the shadows make. The rags are seen as robes. Phase 10. The equilibrium of the sage. The world is still a storm of dualities, cold and heat, praise and insult, friend and enemy. If the sage is still in the body, does he not still feel the bite of the wind? What is the advantage of being free while alive? Vidyaranya answers by turning to samatha, the unshakable equilibrium of the heart. It is the state where the mind's distortions have been sufficiently neutralized that the self tastes its own bliss without the interference of ego noise. Vidyaranya identifies several practical fruits that distinguish the sovereign from the sleeper. The realization is no longer a flicker, but a solid recognition. No doubt can re-enter the fortress. The sage's natural state is itself the highest austerity, for his mind rests in the one without effort. Because there is no other grasped as permanently separate, the war with the world is over. Biological pain remains as a signal, but psychological suffering is incinerated. And the natural, causeless joy of the self, what the Taittiriya Upanishad calls the bliss of Brahman, rises from the stilled mind like a spring in a desert. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes a verse on equal vision. He sees a lump of clay, a stone, and gold as equal. He regards the pleasant and the unpleasant as the same. He treats his friends and enemies alike. He is a Jivanmukta. How does the sage maintain equilibrium in a world of extremes? He performs what Vidyaranya describes as the seeing of the substratum. Gold, stone, and clay are all existence. The sheer-ness is identical in all three. When the mind habitually fixates on the relative value, gold is good, waste is bad, it is agitated by the constant fluctuation of things. When the mind is trained to rest in the existence that underlies all forms, the relative values lose their power to destabilize it. The sage is like a person who stands on a mountain top, watching the battle in the valley below. He possesses functional duality but essential unity. In action, he knows the cold is cold and the heat is hot, and he acts to protect the body. In his deepest recognition, he knows the cold and heat are ripples in the same awareness. He is like a professional actor who performs a scene of great emotion while his own center remains stationary. His performance is precise, but his identity is unshaken. Equilibrium is the state where the drama of the day cannot reach the silence of the heart. The equilibrium is total. Phase 11. The final dissolution. What happens when the breath stops? When the arrow of destiny has finished its arc and hits the ground, is there a final change? Does the sage go to a new land, or does he simply vanish? Vidyaranya is not a journey through space. It is the termination of the optical artifact. While alive, the sage is like a fan that has been unplugged. The current is gone, but the blades still spin. Vidyaranya is the moment when the blades finally stop. The world of multiplicity no longer even appears as a ghost. The one is no longer even recognized as one. There is only the unconditioned, partless mass of reality. Vidyaranya turns to the image of the space in a jar. While the jar exists, the space seems to be small, shaped, and movable. When the jar is shattered, where does the inner space go? The space does not travel to meet the great space. It does not merge with the sky as if it were a separate thing arriving from outside. It simply ceases to be limited by a conceptual wall. It was never anything else. Liberation after death is the removal of the linguistic boundary. The two was a visual artifact of the clay. In Jivanmukti, the sage had double vision. He saw the world as a sublated appearance, there for the eyes but dead for the heart. In Vidyaranya, even this as if world evaporates. In life, the mirror is clean, but the mirror is still there and you see the face. In death, the mirror itself dissolves into its elements. The reflection does not leave the glass to return to the face. The reflection was always the face, appearing under a condition. When the condition is liquidated, the very concept of reflection is dissolved. From the Yoga Vasishta, Vidyaranya quotes the canonical verse on this merger, a verse that appears at a central moment in the text and that he clearly intends as the evidentiary climax of this section. As milk poured into milk becomes one with it, as oil poured into oil merges without remainder, as water poured into water is indistinguishable from it, so the self of the knower merges in the Supreme Self. We do not use the word joined. Joining requires two things to meet. We use the word unity. The drop of water in the ocean is not destroyed, but it can no longer be identified as a separate this. The I-ness of the sage expands until there is no not, I left to provide a border. The many has been reduced to the infinite fullness. Death is a biological technicality, not a spiritual event. Vidyaranya is the end of the persistence of the shadow. Identify as the shoreless awareness that provides the space for all bodies to rise and fall. The drop is the sea. Phase 12. The sovereign silence. The manual falls silent. The logic of the threefold practice has been applied. The habits have been incinerated. The mind stuff has been dissolved. And the momentum of the body has been identified as a harmless echo. The student no longer asks what now, for there is no one left to receive an order. The seeker has reached the terminal point of inquiry. The restless knower of the earlier phases has become the sovereign silence. The medicine of the word was used to cure the fever of the world. Now that the fever is gone, the medicine is discarded. The instruction is revealed to have been a vibration in the void, leading the mind back to the state before vibrations began. What remains when the last splinter of the mind is removed? Vidyaranya describes the absolute as purna, fullness. It is not void, for it is the witness of the void's impossibility. It is not fullness in the sense of a container filled with things. It is the unconditioned is-ness that remains when the many and the one are both seen as linguistic artifacts. Sovereignty is not a victory over the world. It is the realization that the world never possessed a single atom of independent reality to be fought. Even the knowledge of liberation is technically a modification of the mind. It is the final modification, the one that destroys all others and then vaporizes. Like a fire that consumes a forest and then dies because there is no wood left, the discrimination consumes the ignorance and then vanishes into the radiance. If you are still thinking about liberation, you are still holding the manual. Drop the manual. Stand in the shoreless radiance. The Jivanmukti Viveka has done its work. The triple thread has been drawn tight. The life is understood. It was a mechanical residual. The mind is dissolved. It has returned to its source. The silence is established. It is the only fact. You are the foundational isness. You no longer need these words, for you are the awareness from which they were born. Here ends the Jivanmukti Viveka, the discrimination of living liberation.